Welcome to the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program's Ottoman Greeks of the United States Digital History Project's Remembering 1922 video series. In this and all upcoming episodes of the series, the names of the interviewees have been coded to protect their identity. This and the next episode presents the migrants' experiences of expulsion, escape, and economic migration from the city of Izmir and its adjacent towns and villages. According to the descendants' recollections, one cause for migration to the U.S. from Izmir and its proximal towns and villages was due to massacres committed by the Turkish troops and irregular forces. Teresa's granduncle and grandaunt exemplified this category.
My great-uncle, his wife, and his children, I think there were two of them at least, may have been more, I don't know, at least two, they were murdered. That was the word that was used by my great-aunt. I think they were marched off somewhere, and she used the word machine gunned to death. And she was supposed to be married, actually, the weekend after that happened. They had set for the wedding. But when that happened, they killed the groom, they burned the house that he had built. Of course, the place burned down. And along with it, all of her prika, all of her stuff that she had ready for the marriage. And she barely escaped rape, actually. Only because she ran into the area of town where there were European people, and a French family took her in off the streets. The soldiers were after her, and they took her in. So she told us about all of that, and then after it was over, she went and found her mother, who had somehow escaped all of this slaughter, and all of them together, I guess, went down to the waterfront and were able to get on a boat and go to Piraeus.
Meanwhile, Teresa's grandfather migrated to escape conscription. This has been a dominant pattern in all episodes of our series.
The story is that he fled under cover of darkness. And what he always told us, my grandmother and his sons also, and myself, was that you never make a prejudgment on a person based on how they look. Because apparently there was a gentleman that there was something about him that he didn't like his looks. And it turned out that man was the one who had the boat that took him out of Izmir and rowed him out to whatever ship was sitting in the harbor that he could get on. And this was done at night. I knew that he left on the cover of darkness because they were wanting to put him in, like I said, in the army. And he always said that taught me the lesson: do not judge a person from what he looks like, because he could be your best benefactor. He can save your life.
Lisa's grandfather also escaped from Izmir to avoid conscription.
His family lived in Izmir, in a little town, Dikali, and he fled in 1914. He was one of the only males, actually the only male child to make it out. He fled with his mother and his grandmother. His father and grandfather were massacred by the Turks, and they came with him. He was smuggled out as a little girl. His name is Panayota, but they went as Betty. They made it formal, they changed it a little bit, they tweaked it, because they were afraid that the Turks would take him, the Turkish soldiers, to look for mines underground and in the tunnels, and he was dressed up as a little girl for like the first 6 years of his life. He looked like Mary Pickford. He had curls, little pigtails.
Another main theme in all of our episodes has been economic migration. Mike recalls this being the reason for his grandparents' migration. However, their experience also incorporates transnationalism between the US and Izmir during the last days of the Ottoman Empire.
In the year 1909, things were not good in Smyrna. My grandparents decided that the thing for them to do was to come to America. They were so poor that my grandfather was the only one that could afford passage to the new country. So in 1909, he did in fact leave. And I have a series of 4 postcards that he wrote back to my grandmother at each of the various stops that he made. I think he left from Athens, so there was a postcard from Patras, one from Marseille, one from Le Havre, and maybe one that he sent from New York, if I remember correctly, when they landed at Ellis Island. My grandfather came to this country, as I said, in 1909, as I mentioned, by himself. He worked a year and a half as a barber in order to save up enough money to go back to Smyrna and get the family. By 1917, he had earned enough or saved enough to have his own establishment. Tragically, however, in 1920, he died at a very early age. He was 39 years old. My grandmother had 7 children. In a new country, very few friends. I mean, they had their circle of friends, but she had no husband, no means of support. She tried staying in this country for some period of time. She tried for about 8 or 9 months to tough it out and make ends meet, but with 4 kids it was very difficult. So in 1921, she went back to Smyrna. And this is where the story gets remarkable. In 1921, she went back to Smyrna to be with family, because that's where her family was. Less than a year after they got there, all hell broke loose. In September, Smyrna was devastated, burned by the Turks. By virtue of the fact that my family my family by that time were American citizens. The children were all born in the United States. They were citizens. By that time, my grandmother had become a naturalized citizen. They enjoyed the advantage, to whatever extent it was an advantage, of being American citizens, and because all of the Allies were in the harbor, they had petitioned the American consul, George Horton, for assistance. The situation in Smyrna was very desperate around that time. In addition to all of the refugees who had crowded the docks and the quays, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, and all the marauding and the raping and the killing that was going on, the people in Smyrna had gone to extreme lengths to hide, to protect themselves. One of the stories in our family that surrounds a very treasured picture of my Uncle Costa, my Aunt Helen, and my father. This picture was taken in 1922, and it's a picture showing all 3 of them, and it shows my Uncle Costa and my father dressed in American sailor uniforms, and as the story goes, they were dressed that way as a way of explaining to the Turks that they were Americans, hands off. I think it goes a long way to showing the lengths to which people would go, and the mindset and their fears about the situation there. as I said, they petitioned for help. And this was a story that was told to me by my aunt. And she said that one day the captain of the ship and his wife showed up with some sailors to take them away. I'm fairly sure what she meant, or what the reality was perhaps one of the officers from the ship showed up with perhaps a Red Cross worker and a contingent of sailors from the ship. In any event, she has vivid memories of that officer carrying my uncle and the nurse or the Red Cross worker holding her by the hand in one hand and my father by the hand in the other hand, walking with the family down the streets towards the docks and the quay, which is very significant at this point in time because by that time chaos reigned. There were tens of thousands, if not more, refugees on the docks. It was horrendous, and apparently they, by virtue of the fact that the Allied forces had a path cleared to the dock, and they were about to get on the launch, and they started boarding the launch to take them out to one of the ships that was in the harbor. And as they were boarding, they questioned one of the people that had come with them, and that person was my yaya's sister, who was not American. And they told her that she couldn't go. And of course, and again, I can only imagine how this transpired on the dock in the setting that, we're discussing. My grandmother says, I can't leave my sister. She got into this conversation with the officer that was in charge of the detachment, and he was insistent that he could not take her. And she said, well, then if that's the case, you have to take me back. And the sailors took them back to their home and left. 1 week later, somehow they got hooked up with a group of people who had somehow clandestinely secured a barge, and they left in the dark of night from God knows where, I don't know where, but they were able to get away, this group of people on a barge, and they made it across the bay to Chios. From Chios they made it to Athens.
Mark recalled that his father migrated to the U.S. in 1914 in order to save his own life.
1914, he and a couple of his friends were there with, I guess it was a resurgence of Greek patriotism at the time. How and why, I'm not sure. But they were downtown, somewhere in the area, the downtown area, and they were marching and they were singing some kind of patriotic song. Now, she told me something about a plea or something, and I've asked that question. No one seems to know about a patriotic song about a Greek ship. Now, she said they were singing a song about the ship, and I didn't write it down at the time, or maybe it had to do something. Well, what happened is a bunch of Turkish youths grabbed them all and they tortured them. This is what they do: is they put you down flat on the ground, face down, okay, and they tie your hands behind your back and they arc you. They lift your feet in the back, take your shoes off, tie a stick in the back, and then someone consistently beats the bottom of your feet with a stick until the pain becomes so harsh. But your feet get bloody, and they do cause damage to your feet. Then they stand you up. Someone jumps on your back and they ride you piggyback until So that's what they did to my uncle, and because years later he experienced broken arches, and so then they took him downtown to the I guess a police station or whatever. They grabbed these people and took him down there. My grandfather went down to try and get him out because he didn't know what was going to happen to him, and also one of the priests went down to try with my grandfather, and some of the other parents went down to try and get them out, and they let them go, but someone came and told my grandfather, they're just hide your son or get him out, or they're either going to put him in the army or they're going to kill him. And that's when my grandfather sent him over. They got him out of the country and sent him over in 1914. He was the first to come over, and his life was threatened. That's why.
Like Mark's father, Tanya's mother and grandmother also escaped under the threat of their lives. They did so by foot from Izmir, as the Turkish army was bearing down on the city.
The Greco-Turkish War started in 1922, so Mother was about 10. And the war was going badly for the Greek, and the villagers were warned that the Turkish army was headed their way and they needed to abandon the village. Our Yaya and Mother were along. And our uncle was in the Greek army but they didn't know where he was. And she didn't say that they were headed anywhere specific. But they wanted to find the Greek army, and they went in the direction where they thought the army was. On the way, they ran into a group of Circassians, and she said that this was who warned them that they were going into the wrong direction. They turned around and headed to a port on the Sea of Marmara. And there were British ships in the harbor, but they were not allowed to come ashore and pick up refugees, so there was a mad scramble to get into the boats and row to the British ships. That's when Yaya and Mother got separated from them. The British ships picked them up and took them across to Thrace and left them. Mother said they had nothing, no food, nothing. What they found were vineyards, and she said they survived on grapes from the vineyards. Now the Turks were pushing westward through Thrace, and during the next year, Mother and Yaya moved ahead of them.
Finally, Tanya's mother and grandmother reconnected in Athens, but they found another obstacle before them during their migration to the U.S.
They were kept in tents until they were given permits to go on the ship Alexander, which brought them to Ellis Island. But they were denied admission to America because the quota from Greece had been exceeded for the month. So our uncle went to the immigration authorities and pleaded with them to let his family come over. They wanted to send them back to Smyrna, but there was no Smyrna because then it was Izmir. So they somehow, to make a long story short, they let them come here.
The next episode in our series continues envisioning the last days of the Ottoman Greek community's presence in Izmir through the recollections of their descendants. We hope you join us next month as we continue honoring the memory of their ancestors. The researchers at the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program's Ottoman Greeks of the United States Digital History Project would like to thank you, our listeners, for your support of this important research. We look forward to your comments and hope you enjoyed listening to this episode as much as we enjoyed producing it. See you next time.